Welcome. My name's Garth Powell. Today what I want to talk about is our international series, Sequencers. Now, in AC power management, there's many ways that we can go about that process, and we have a number of products that do an exemplary job of protecting and purifying. This is at the core of any AC power management product. But for many systems, we also have to look at another function, and that is sequencing. When we look at a sequencer, first we must determine, why do we particularly need that? Why would that be important? Why would we need to stagger the turn on and turn off of a number of components in a system, in a rack, or spread out upon multiple buildings or multiple zones? Well, simply put, let's look at a couple of very basic scenarios, particularly in professional audio video. We're at a concert, we're at a discotheque, we're at a club. And in this particular theater or other environments, we've got perhaps a mixing console, we've got a number of processors, then we've got a number of amplifiers, or perhaps if there's not power amplifiers in a rack, we've got a backline, or we've got powered monitors, we've got line arrays. Now in a situation like this, what we have to be very, very careful of is not only maintaining the fact that we don't have a vicious pop, boom, going through and damaging our subwoofers or other loudspeaker products simply because things are been staggered and come on in the wrong sequence of operation to where there's a big DC offset pulse coming from the processor rack or the mixing console rack that's coming on after the amplifier. This is wrong. This is known by any AV professional. So we stagger the operation. We make sure that the power amplifiers turn on last and turn off first. It's very, very simple. But there's other reasons for sequencing as well. For example, if you have a large power amplifier, as you're going to have in most professional situations, regardless of whether it's a switching power supply or a linear power supply, you're going to have a massive current inrush typically if it's a large amplifier. It's not a problem once the amplifier is fully in conduction. This will typically happen in less than a second. But that first quarter of a second, particularly if it turns on at what's called the quarter wave peak, with many amplifiers used in the professional domain, this can be anywhere from 200 amps to 400 amps. And if you have anywhere from 3 to 4 to 5 to many dozen amplifiers turning on potentially at the same time, you're going to take out your wall circuit breaker, you're going to take out your local circuit breakers, and if you have a generator, it will darn near want to, its governor will darn near want to freeze on you. We can't have this, so we have to stagger their operation. Now, in the home world, this is understood. All of those amplifiers are typically controlled by RS-232, possibly IP operations. They've got slow start, that's not a problem. But inside the professional domain, things are done a little bit different way. And sometimes we have a controller, sometimes we want to do it with basic simple contact closure. And this is where our legacy products of sequencers have been for some time. One of our classic products that we've had for over a decade now is the power sequencer, or PS8RE2. This one was a standout from other sequencers in the industry and previous ones we'd done going back over 20 years ago, in that it featured some of our technology like our series multi-stage protection as well as our linear filtration. Now what that means to you is a level of AC surge and voltage spike protection that could handle up to 6,000 volts or 3,000 amp spikes. Why is that important? Because if you only had 3 to 5% more energy than that coming from anything from a direct lightning hit outside of your building or outside of your theater domain or outside of your concert, the wiring would burn, the house or building or outside would literally be set on fire, and at that point all of your racks of equipment are fairly irrelevant since everybody's running from the building, like basically running for their lives. Anything short of that, this will not only protect your connected equipment, it will protect itself. No downtime, no service call, over 1/3 of a million sold since we invented this technology over 8 years ago, not a single failure, not one. Now, that's the bonus in the line, because we also have linear filtering technology. Now, everybody talks about their filters, and you can buy very inexpensive AC power management products with very basic EMI, RFI filters inside them. But linear filtering is quite different. It covers many octaves that others simply will not. It does it so in a very consistent linear fashion. And we've been able to prove with differential tests from Liberty Systems that we can, on high resolution files, such as a WAV file, such as a lossless file, or such as a 1080 high definition file, for those applications where this would matter, we can extract up to another 20% of resolution you could not obtain without this technology if you were going directly into an inferior filter or no filter at all. With linearized filtering, you've got everything you paid for. As great as this unit was, at this point, I would consider it, frankly, obsolete. At least for the professional or the serious professional contractor. Here's why. First of all, it's very, very important that I be able to not only sequence those products, just like I said, but if I've got some components that are at the front of house, some are at the back of house, some are in the back line, or if I'm in a school or in an office, set of office suites, I might have one in one room, one in another conference room, one in another office, one in another office. I'm using very simple dry contact closure wiring between these to stagger in series or daisy chain and operate all of these. That's fine, but with the earlier technology, there were some limits to that. Without an outside third-party controller, the problems we had were that, for one thing, we could certainly ensure that all of the sequencing banks, unswitched, delay 1, delay 2, delay 3, we could make sure that we had up to a minute of delay and as little as a quarter of a second between each one. But once the wiring from this unit was daisy chained to another in lengths up to 100 meters. The problem was that when it came time without the third-party controller to sequence down, they were all going to sequence down together, 3, 2, 1. If I have so many products that I need to divide amongst several of these in my sequencing chain, unfortunately, that's a problem. I may not be able to, although I can stagger the turn on and prevent the clamping down or disconnection of a circuit breaker, I may still have the dangerous pop. And certainly with today's sophisticated switchers and routers and so forth, this isn't long enough circuit time. I need more control. This is a scenario that without third-party control simply can't work for much of today's sophisticated electronics and integrated systems. Enter the next generation of power, Furman Smart Sequencing. With the new generation of smart sequencing, the entire game has changed. For one thing, with smart sequencing, if we take a look at the back of this unit, we now have a port that's our legacy port that, just as before, has your basic 12-volt ground remote that can essentially work with any of our earlier ones, just like you saw, the PS8R, the PS Pro E2, regardless of whether it's Series 1, Series 2. This is legacy. You can have dry contact closure and use those as a secondary unit in the chain if you like. But here's where I'm going to encourage you to start anew and think about having the entire system be smart sequencing, because the second port is two-way communication, and with two small wires, as little as half millimeter, like a twisted pair wiring, now all of a sudden you have the means to communicate not 100 meters, but over 330 meters from unit to unit, from the primary unit to every secondary unit. I can have as many secondary units as I want. They're all communicating back and forth with each other, back to the primary unit. And with smart sequencing, I also have the ability for these to turn on 1, 2, 3, but then 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And when it's time to disengage the power, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, as it should be. But we're not going to have to purchase or set up an outside controller. This system does that automatically. In addition to that, it also has a third port that allows us to use a third-party controller system. So if you want any of these units or the primary unit to be functioned or controlled in that particular way, it can be. Your choice. We give you the freedom. We give you the options. In addition to that, if you have a government building, a scholastic building, or any place in an office where you're worried about the fire marshal or fire code, where you have to force the units off when the fire alarm kicks in, that can be done here. And It only has to go to the first primary unit. The rest of the units in the chain will automatically see that command and follow the forced off in the exact same way. We also have RS-232 at this point. So you want to have all this command, the entire chain commanded with an outside controller, even the most sophisticated controllers. Perhaps even looking at an outside controller that's being operated by IP statically. You can do that right now. And in addition to that, in only a couple of months, we have another product coming. That would be the Furman BlueBOLT BB-RS-232. With this simply attached to the side of the rack or along the back or front rack rail, the RS-232 port connects to this. The Ethernet comes into here. The indicator shows that you've got internet connection. And once that occurs, you can use our cloud-based IP. And with any computer, whether it's a simple smartphone or anything more sophisticated, anywhere in the world, any format, makes no difference. MyBlueBOLT.com, plug and play, set up all the parameters, you're in there and you're turning things off, you're scheduling commands, and you're monitoring at any time you need to. You have complete control, you're monitoring, you know what's happening to the voltage, you know what's happening to the current, and you know what the history has been for the day, the week, the month. In addition to that, you have the ability to do scheduled commands. You have the ability to reset the internet if you've got a modem or a router plugged into this for your internet access. There's another unique feature to Furman's BlueBOLT control. And that is in addition to the fact that this can either be used in a static system for security reasons or one where there's already a system in place. That's not a problem. In fact, even with the basic smart sequencing, they're all basic ASCII commands, so any good controller, any good IT person can manipulate it quite easily. We supply all the commands you could ever possibly need. But for those that want a very simple plug-and-play option, our cloud-based system works very well. But let me warn you, there are a number of different IP systems out there these days, and when people hear IP, they oftentimes understand the idea that, yes, I have remote access. But not all IP is born the same way. Most of these systems are not cloud-based. Most of them are far from plug-and-play. For example, a system that requires not only individual IP addresses for each device, which, as you know, in a large installation could be dozens, if not hundreds, you also have a situation where many of these will require, for your distant location, its own unique server. Now, oftentimes this server means a great deal of control, particularly for pinging, but there's a downside to this. One of the reasons that IP control in power is so useful today is the fact that these inexpensive switching power supplies have a propensity to lock up and fail. We need to be able to monitor, we need to be able to control, we need to be able to refresh and reboot. The idea that an individual standalone server will be trouble-free and never fail is not terribly realistic, is it? With a cloud-based system such as Furman's, it has multiple levels of redundancy. We have invested over 6 figures annually into this system. It is solid as a rock. That is our commitment to you. This cannot go down. Your clients are far too important. This system has to be fail-safe. This is real. This is not a toy. Beyond that, you had some other issues that, as time went on, we felt needed some refinement. Now, if this particular unit is inside a rack or inside a controlled closet environment, we don't have to worry about anybody having access to this once it's been set, once it's been controlled. Although, to determine whether we were using momentary or maintained switching and to determine the actual setting of the delay, we actually had to pop the top, as it is currently right now, and make some adjustments to the circuit board. With our current technology, that's just simply no longer needed. It all can be done from the front panel. The secondary problem was that if this was in an open environment or an open concert environment or an open office or school environment, any idle hand could come by and either ignite or disengage your entire sequencing operation from any one of these exposed units. In fact, they could even go to one of these units, either one of your secondary units or your primary unit, and completely take off the power or disengage the entire unit. In terms of security, that's unacceptable. Now granted, we could take, just as you do with an equalizer, a graphic equalizer or a parametric, we could take a 1RU security cover and we could cover the whole thing. Problem solved. Except that, at that point, all of our emergency indicators, all of our protection OK indicators, and our convenience outlet, and our delay sequencing indicators, we have no access anymore. That's not acceptable. You can't have a security cover and not be able to see the indicators, particularly on something this sophisticated, because at this point, it's not just a question of having your basic power and protection and extreme voltage indications as our prior units had. We need to make sure that we can see that the primary link is okay, is engaged, the secondary link, and the Ethernet access is there. We obviously want to be able to see delay 1, delay 2, and delay 3. These are all here, and that's easy enough to identify and access. And by the way, with this particular system, no longer having to take the top cover off, we have a security cover. Undo the security cover. Here we go. Okay, and now we have a series of dip switches as well as a potentiometer. Instead of being exposed to the world, it's under a security cover, its own unique one, why we can still have access to the convenience outlet and all the indicators. Everything you could want, very simple. The only tool required, a Phillips driver. Simple. Now, there's some other good features with the new SmartSequencing CN-3600 contractor series as well. For one thing, we're no longer featuring a 1-year or 3-year warranty. How about a 15-year warranty? Because something like this that's going to be going into business, that's going to be into school suites, this isn't a situation where this is necessarily going to be subbed out every few years. It's not a piece for home theater where people are going to be looking for new technologies and new performance benefits every couple of years. Once that hard-won contract and that budget has been stretched that they had to fight for so hard to even get, they want an investment. They want something that's going to last them for decades, ideally. Our units have always been made to be that robust, but at this point, people need to know that they can count on that this is going to last for the duration of that contract. This is going to be trouble-free. We're going to stand behind it in every possible way.